In the events of Resident Evil 4 and the subsequent remake, there are some pretty sketch things going on with the local population. Shortly after the reemergence of the parasite that had been trapped under the ground in cave systems long ago, different forms of mutated anatomical structurings of the human body would begin to crop up that at first were basically just like a slightly changed human. A head exploding with the parasite emerging to pod the meat mech here, an entire worm emerging to bite your head off there. You know, all the classics. But as the parasite became more and more intimately familiar with the human host's body, those who were in charge of infecting others with Las Plagas would begin changing the areas in which the animal would be placed. Typically, the location that the Las Plagas would naturally settle once hatching from its egg stage and entering the larval stage would be roughly about center mass near the T4 through T6 area of the thoracic spine. This area, with the least amount of movement and its whole purpose just to hold up the torso and support the rib cage of a person, would be perfect to make sure, there's no pinch points as well. Known as the cardiac box, this area of the body also has the most amount of blood supply moving through it, and given its proximity to heart, and the lungs would be giving it oxygen as well due to its natural exchange. And due to all these structures being critical, nutrients moving through the body would be continuously located in this area just to keep everything running. So as the parasite moves further into the larval stage and rapidly begins its growth, it will begin to wrap around the spine and likely tap into the pulmonary arteries, aorta, and pulmonary veins as well. This would secure, again, the nutrients, but specifically concerning the oxygenated blood of the pulmonary veins, this would give it the oxygen it needs and likely utilize the host's own red blood cells to allow it to essentially breathe. Because as we know, Las Plagas was trapped in the cave system and would run out of oxygen, where it would enter a form of hibernation until eventually it was exposed once again to the critical air that we all need, and then it was able to come back into its regular form. But from here, Las Plagas would continue past its larval stage and begin entering the adolescent stage, where it can have several impacts on the body. At this point, episodic events concerning loss of control of the body would become more and more common. This is seen when, just by natural compulsion of the parasite, Leon and Ashley will lose control of their body and will turn aggressive on one another or on anybody in general. From here, the blood vessels of the body will begin to be impacted as well, as we see inflammation and potential blood vessel destruction, resulting in the bruising that is seen in the arms, which we can assume under the clothing it has become prevalent as well. And we also see it in the later stages, where Ashley just basically is covered with black blood vessels. The brain will also be altered to a degree, leading to fainting and unconsciousness, as well as hallucinations that can last for several hours. Medication at this point can slow down the growth of the parasite, but it will not stop it once it has established homeostasis with the host. At best, it can render the parasite dormant for a short period of time, but you don't really have a lot of time. As the Las Plagas enters the adult stage, it is all over for the individual at this point. The tendrils of the parasite will extend to all corners of the body, running and intertwining around the bones and through the muscle of the host, as they are completely under the control of the parasite. The brain will assuredly have some tendrils running into it, having followed the spinal column up to the brainstem and beyond that, which now the brain will just sort of act like an alert system for the parasite using the naturally occurring senses. A decreased ability to think, along with autonomy issues, becomes standard once the parasite has completed its growth phase. Ganados will continue on their regular cycles, probably just out of what's left of their cerebrum, but upon any outward stimulus being detected, the parasite will direct the ganado to attack, but not of their own will. This has created a person who is slow moving, and some may still attempt to resist, like Ashley does when they come into contact with Sadler, and she ends up taking out the guards rather than taking out Leon. Although she was about to, it's just the handheld jammed. But it's more likely their brains are essentially unconscious in the later or latest of the stages, and the person is no longer there once the parasite initiates the attack. At this stage of the parasite life cycle, the adult will progress into the later adult stages of the life cycle, where this will result in either Las Plagas A, B, and C, indicating that Las Plagas A is the immature form of adult that mainly has just become a collection of tentacles that have run all over the body. As the Plagas continues to grow, it appears though it will differentiate into Las Plagas B or Las Plagas C variants, depending on the circumstances. Either way, the adult can completely destroy the head of the ganado, as the brain is really no longer the driving force in the body, or at least moving the body, and Las Plagas has become the new brain of the human meat suit. This process is largely agonizing for the individual, but should the plaga stabilize within the body, the standard human form is maintained, and no further growth is detected, apart from potentially muscle mass increase, resulting in strong but altered brain functions. And El Gigante Look at that. I pronounced it right this time. It only took me 5 years. But see, we were going to get there eventually. This is a failed variant of the infection process due to the experimentation concerning the placement of the parasite. While the parasite appears to have an affinity for center mass of the person, the somewhat adult parasite can be implanted into different areas of the body, which will increase the mutagenic effects that the parasite can induce in the host. This would imply that the complete life cycle of the parasite typically will have it integrate into the host's neuronal system more completely, but if implanted at a later point in life, the process seems to be a joining between parasite and host will actually result in structural changes in the anatomy more so than just neurological. So in today's episode, let's discuss the mutations induced by Las Plagas and El Gigante in Resident Evil 4 Remake and why their bodies seem to be so wildly different even when infected with the same form of parasite as compared to like the rest of the village. But first, before jumping in, I want to say thank you guys for watching. I always do appreciate the support on this channel. I had to re-upload Zombieland. You may have noticed that. We got hit because of the soundtrack. Completely stupid, but it is what it is. It's always fun how they find a video that's taking off and then just kind of, ruin it. But I also appreciate all the support over on Rono Tales. It's always fun to bring you guys this content on like the physiological destruction concerning this game in particular, because my god, is it fun to think about. Of course, the real life implications are horrifying, but we won't worry about that. So if you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss when I upload just a bunch of crackpot biological hypotheses about how things work. Sometimes it's wild to think about. I went from testing diseases in a lab to this. Anyways, thanks for watching and let's get to it. The process of making El Gigante is not a pleasant one, and that isn't just for the uninfected. El Gigante has a unique problem that would see its production starkly limited as a result, as it became a, well, we created this thing, what do we do with it sort of deal. The initial thinking with El Gigante was thought up seeing as they could basically point out all the limitations with the regular human form and what they would have fighting something with like a trained resistance that was bound to crop up if world leaders were infected with the Las Plagas. The civilians are probably, or not even just civilians, but military, are probably not just going to take that lying down. So because of this, a more tanky variety of infected was needed, which would lead to experimentations on what exactly Las Plagas was capable of doing. The scientists already infected were laboring under the impression that, judging by what they had seen with others who were infected in the formation of the parasite, that these same mutations could be induced in others and that potentially there is a stage of the life cycle that would be important when cursing someone with this affliction, as well as how many Las Plagas were implanted into the body, such as with the Regenerator. Rather than letting the life cycle continue naturally from like an egg state to the adult stage in one host, likely an adolescent or even possibly an adult parasite would be implanted into the cervical region of the spine of a person to study the effects of the parasite by mating the two adults together, one being the host and the other being the parasite, and they were fairly surprised by the results, although there was a lot of horrific, immoral things kind of going on with the testing anyways. Now, before moving on, there is some conflicting information on how exactly this was accomplished. Take Leon, for instance. When he was infected, the egg is directly injected into his neck, where it moves to the center mass. It's important to note that there are files that were removed from the game itself that indicate El Gigante is a result of the body almost somewhat rejecting the parasite, or the parasite somewhat rejecting the host, and as a result, they never truly stabilize within one another, although this could just be a result of making the older parasite try to adapt to a new host. It is noted that because of this inability to stabilize within one another, that those who were recently infected must be kept in containment until they have been shown that they are essentially entering a harmonious relationship with the parasite. I mean, granted, that's not exactly a great relationship, but hey, it is what it is. The other interesting aspect is those who were infected would begin displaying symptoms that the connection was actually failing. The symptoms seen would show that the host was in poor health, which in turn, some would go on to lie and say they felt great just to get out of the situation. This may show that the parasite has a more incomplete grasp on the neurological functioning of the brain if the mating was not successful, but this brain preservation would be a temporary arrangement because it would ultimately be worse for those who do not connect as readily to the parasite. In fact, it can be seen that Ashley and Leon specifically appear to be able to resist somewhat with the parasite. Now, this could be for two reasons. Either the parasite, again, just hasn't mated completely or does not have enough influence over the actual host body, and so they're able to resist, or they were incompatible hosts, which means they may have actually turned into El Gigante. So, I mean, I suppose depending on who you ask, it's all pretty bad for any individual, whether they connect or not. So it's just Not a great situation. But this does bring an interesting idea into question, that if there are hosts out there that would fully reject the parasite, or possibly the parasite fully rejects them, and this may result in those who potentially could be immune to the infection, given that the village is an incredibly small sample size, and even still, there are several who have a partial rejection. But because this was removed and the explanation is changed to the parasite just being attached to the cervical spine area as opposed to the thoracic, it would seem to me that this requires more than just the injection of the egg, which means the parasite is surgically attached. This attachment to the spine, more closely to the brain, would have some pretty profound impacts on the body's structuring overall. But before getting into the internal endocrinology resulting in this behemoth, we must first take a look at its morphology so that we can have a good understanding of the impact just change of the location and age of the parasite may have had. 2019 Roanoke was better. Starting with the feet, we see, believe it or not much has changed in terms of structuring. It's interesting to note that some of those infected will change the actual structuring of the foot itself, such as with the Verdugo, but for El Gigante, he has all 5 toes still intact, a well-defined kind of structuring of the foot, and the foot itself maintains a normal arch and heel to tarsal bone ratio. The foot, however, is now probably as long as a standard adult male's legs, which has given it the ability to easily crush anything underfoot. The skin on the foot is muddy and gray, which will be the standard for the rest of the body. This could be due to several factors, but most likely it's because the skin had to grow rapidly. The melanistic characteristics, say that 5 times fast, changed along with the skin itself probably dying closer to the dermal layer from its cancerous push to divide, and this has actually made it appear like a giant Shar-Pei. Moving up the leg, we see the leg continues in its standard human plantigrade structuring, as the calves have become swole goals, being likely about the size of a human torso. This would be quite necessary, as the weight it must hold up would be staggering, meaning that likely internally the Achilles tendon had to have grown in size as well. It's also important to note that the structuring of the body isn't just all El Gigante. It's likely the tentacles that are seen sprouting from the body of other ganados are present in this creature as well, and give it support to maintain its size. While the structuring of El Gigante's leg is pretty normal, the weight of this creature has caused it to have knees that are constantly bent while walking. It can fully extend its legs, but the pressure on the knee joints would likely be staggering, meaning that while this thing can walk for now, it likely wouldn't be able to actually move in just a few short months to a year, seeing as the knees would wear out quite quickly. The leg muscles of the thigh region are quite large, and the quadriceps are about double the size of the torso of a regular man. The abdomen of El Gigante, I'm sorry to say, is not a swole goal scenario. Possessing the bodybuilder stomach, it's likely the intestines inside to fuel this creature's growth are quite large and have left an ill-defined abdominal wall. Interestingly, as you continue up the abdomen and just below the beginning of the pectoral, you can see this ridge forming. This is known as the diaphragm, which is a sheet of muscle that helps you breathe and separates the 2 cavities of the abdominal and thoracic cavity. It seems rather enlarged on El Gigante for an unknown reason, but it may be possible that there is a central tentacle stemming from the parasite that may serve as essentially a branch point for the other tentacles of the body, and it just wraps around this area underneath the skin. The chest region of El Gigante is fairly stretched out, with the pectoral muscles having likely as much muscle on them as the entirety of the human body. But getting up to the shoulders, we see some more detrimental changes to the body brought on by the parasite, but are just absolutely destructive to everything around it. Because of the location of the parasite being on the cervical area of the spine, this has actually pushed the head forward and brought the parasite up to the apex of the body. The shoulders and trapezius muscles, as a result of the parasitic-inspired growth, have become absolutely massive, giving El Gigante a hunched-over appearance, much like that of a gorilla. The shoulders by themselves, if you were to compare it to like a normal body ratio, are likely 2 to 3 times the size of what you would expect. Essentially, this man has never missed a shoulder or arms day in his life, because moving down the arms, we see this musculature continues all the way down to the forearms as well, which are as large as the biceps and triceps. This gives the creature tremendous grasping strength, as it can easily pick up a full-grown man and probably just close its hand around them and crush them to a pulp as well. The hands of this creature are much like the feet. They are in normal proportions roughly to the rest of the human body for the most part again, but they are ashen gray as well. The fingernails are a little longer than normal, but that's probably just from standard growth more than anything. Moving up to the head, it's a face-only Saddler club, but then again, he didn't really like these things anyways. No, really. After creating El Gigante, they realized this was kind of a mess-up, so they made something that would probably just openly attack their own people as much as it would attack invaders. Not great. Definitely something you want to think about. But the face has largely changed, but interestingly, everything has enlarged in a uniform way. Typically with rapid growth in the skull, we can see a few areas increase in size, such as the brow ridge, forehead region, and jaw, which will change the face ratio to a pretty extreme degree and can completely alter the look of a person. In El Gigante, however, they probably didn't look like this to begin with, but it appears as though these changes that took place result in a fairly, and I use that term loosely, normal-looking person. The size increase, according to the skull that we have seen, also causes the mandible to crack in half, which is actually normal if you didn't know that. If your jaw grows too much too fast, the center of it will crack because there's too much pressure on the weaker top of the arch or near the front of your jaw. The teeth are more spread out as a result of this growth, and the nose to mouth ratio is somewhat altered. The eyes have appeared outward or moved outward due to the growth of the lacrimal bone, which is at the top of your nose. The eyes appear also to have increased in size to not just fall out of the head of El Gigante, but this appears to have maybe caused some issue with the eyesight, as they seem like they're having them haze over, which likely indicates blindness is not far off. The ears did not keep up with the growth, but have still grown to around 2 to 3 times the size of normal ears, and these smaller ears likely do increase the difficulty in funneling sound into their ear canal properly, which in turn likely decreases this sense's effectiveness. Now, due to the parasite's growth, this has inspired some internal anatomical changes. The first thing to note is, again, the tentacles have spread all throughout the body and are likely even larger than the ones seen in Ganados. The skeletal system of the body has been heavily altered, leading to longer and more dense bones to support the weight of this creature, but this has changed its overall morphology as a result. This has actually been seen in humans naturally and has happened as a result, which basically kickstarts a second form of puberty, which gives us a good idea on how the parasite is operating and influencing the body internally as well. The growth plates of bone that are on the long bone specifically are known as the epiphyseal plates, and they would be reactivated, which is usually not possible as they calcify, but with the parasite at the helm, these areas would reactivate regardless, making the creature roughly about 4 to 6 times the height of an average adult. However, the bones would need more than just growth plates reactivating, as bones probably are going to snap like twigs, holding up that weight if they were just longer. See, that's the issue with being extra tall. Your bones are more brittle as forces put on them become greater the longer they are. Short kings rise up. I imagine what could be taking place is as the tentacles wrap around the bones may undergo microfractures and are stretched out as more bone goes in to fill the voids. This increases the length of the bone, which in turn allows for the creature to reach the height that it is. The bones are then bolstered even further by the massive release of osteoblasts to build up the bone and fill in those voids, and also build them outwards to make them more dense. However, they do not appear to stop at the standard bone growth level and will continue adding bone at the hormonal instructions of the parasite. Due to this bone growth, areas of ligament connections and tendon connections would be bolstered, as there would be more bone infused inside of those connection points, allowing for greater forces to be enacted upon them without tearing away from the bone itself, which we'll get into the skeletal musculature here in a moment. This continued all over the body, but the effects are most seen in the spinal column. As the vertebrae continue to go, each vertebrae would push against the one next to it, increasing its height and length of the torso rapidly. This process, along with the bone snapping, would be incredibly painful for the host. Like, you would probably just want a standard infection at this point. Hopefully they would be unconscious, because otherwise it would feel like your entire body is being bathed in fire as nerves would start to be stretched and pulled. This has given El Gigante the hunched over appearance, as the cervical area would be altered into a C shape as opposed to its standard S shape that it naturally is going to have. Bones are all well and good, but if El Gigante just had the standard amount of muscle on its body, it's incredibly doubtful it would even be able to move all the weight of its own bones. As the bones continued their growth, the muscles would also begin growing all over the body to support this new arrangement. The caloric intake would be absolutely massive to properly grow this body. But then again, I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb here and assume that all those missing people, after they got done, removing the head, they would then just feed them to El Gigante. So after all, humans do have roughly 125,822 calories, so that would pretty much be needed to grow them as big as they are. We can see the effects most notably in the shoulders and arms regions, as mentioned earlier, but the next question becomes, why were they growing the way that they were? Due to the location of the parasites on the cervical area of the spine, I believe one area of the brain was heavily influenced by the parasite's direction, and this would be the pituitary gland. Dysfunctions in the pituitary gland are seen within normal humans from time to time, as mentioned. This can result in that second form of puberty for an individual, as something like a tumor, for instance, can cause human growth hormone to be released in a massive amount of quantity. As this hormone then floods the body, bone and muscle would start growing again. Now, this doesn't sound all that bad, but when you realize it can lead to things like facial structural changes and neurological issues, growing doesn't sound that great. In fact, I know somebody when I was going through EMT school, her father one day was talking about like something with his face. It looked different in the mirror, and then the family started to notice it, but they just kind of let it go for a while, and he actually had a tumor on his pituitary gland, and his face was changing. It was just such a slow process that it's kind of like losing weight, for instance, right? Within 3 weeks, you notice you're losing weight, but nobody else does. Within 6 weeks, your family does. Within 9 weeks, your friends do. And within 12 weeks, perfect strangers can notice that you've lost weight. So this is a very similar process. Acromegaly is the medical term that it is called, and gigantism is kind of a more colloquial term. And the process is the body starts to grow, and if the cause is not addressed quickly, it can lead to issues in a rapid amount of time. In fact, the tallest man in the world, Robert Wadlow, who stood at a staggering 8 feet 11 inches or 271 centimeters tall, would continue growing his entire life due to hypertrophy in the pituitary gland, leading to this continuous release of human growth hormone. Even at the time of his death, there was no indication that he was slowing down, but the taller he got, the more his neurons would be stretched to their maximum capacity, which would result in him losing feeling and experiencing a tingling sensation in his extremities. The same does not apply for El Gigante, however, but the situation is the same. Much like how the parasite can cause new cells to grow, it's likely that when it's implanted into the neck region of a person, its tentacles would spread out into the brain before inducing almost a cancerous growth in the pituitary gland, or essentially just a continuous communication to keep releasing human growth hormone. The body would react by continuing its growth, but it also appears possible that this hormone affects the parasite as well because it grew larger than average than at least what we've seen. So large, in fact, that if the skin is breached, this would cause the parasite to forcibly exit out of the neck area, and rather than destroying the head, I really just think that might be an arrangement because of where the head was, and it didn't have to move it out of the way to get out of the body. So you can kind of think of human growth hormone as sort of like a master hormone somewhat for the body. It will have cascading effects that can be felt throughout the entire system. From here, I believe that the neurons themselves would also start growing. With the added muscle mass, the motor neurons would need to compensate to recruit more new muscle fibers to actually move the creature. This has presented an interesting issue for the brain of El Gigante as a result of this. It seems to me that with this newfound requirement of muscle movement in other possible areas of the brain, they may have been just voluntold to begin taking over the push to move the body. So now remember, it is a video game, and this entire process would just render El Gigante is like a giant vegetable, but this appears to help explain the intelligence issue seen in El Gigante. There is a concept known as the brain-body mass ratio. While not completely perfect, it helps to somewhat explain why intelligence in some species is so high and in others it's so low. For instance, one species that just got absolutely roasted is the bone-eared assfish. It is known to have the smallest brain-to-body mass ratio of all the vertebrates. Why someone just decimated this fish's whole career is beyond me, but by contrast, humans are known to have a much larger ratio with big brains and a relatively small body. This process isn't perfect, however, and nor is the idea. Humans sit around a 1 to 40 ratio, ants sit around a 1 to 7 ratio, and elephants around a 1 to 560 ratio. Yet humans are the most intelligent, then elephants, then ants. Folding within the cerebrum has had a major impact on our intelligence, as it clearly shows it doesn't just come down to this ratio, but again, it highlights there is a causal connection there. With this behemoth, it appears as though the brain hasn't really increased in size. I mean, it may have some, and this increasing need to just even move the body would require some brain growth. But remember my explanation as to how humans are sort of hitting a wall in terms of intelligence. If we add too many neurons, it's going to slow down our thinking. And also, if we add too many neurons, it's just going to allow the brain to heat up more, which is not a good thing. And if we have too many connections form, it's also going to slow down our ability to think. But the parasite appears to alter chemical functioning, and this has caused intellect to take a sharp dip. Areas of the brain being recruited to help facilitate movement would put it in the range of neuroplasticity, which we all know does exist, and the adaptation the brain can undergo to do so. But largely, I would probably say that some of the intelligence dip is likely due to the parasite forcing tentacles through the brain, which can lead to some brain damage. This damage essentially made El Gigante a type of infected that was not easy to control, and the increase in hormones basically rendered it in a continuous roid rage, attacking anything around it, because we can also assume with its size increase, there's other areas of the body that are responsible for producing testosterone that probably also increased in size as well. But this accompanied with the fact that not all parasites fall in the same line as one another, and some are considered to be other dominant strains on their own and will not listen to another strain, along with being fed humans who were basically abducted, means these are better to be restrained and dropped into an area than to be directed. Basically, it's like releasing a tiger from its cage. You don't want to be near the cage when the door opens, regardless of who you are. So when fighting El Gigante, the entire plan is basically just to crush you, but upon making it angry enough, it will grab you, and should you not have like a knife, or you just kind of want to figure out what its breath smells like, it will put Leon's head in its mouth, quickly ripping off his head with a bite, and then with one jaw movement completely crush his Leon's removed head between its molars. I mean, you were screwed prior regardless, but I'm pretty sure you might still feel that, as you probably didn't have enough time to go into shock. It seems like a absolutely horrific way to go. The rest of the body is likely eaten at that point as well for the caloric intake. Should you not want to find that horrible fate because mama didn't raise no punk, it comes down to attacking the parasite in the back. Like a puppeteer pulling on the marionette strings to operate the puppet's body, it seems to be a very similar arrangement with this behemoth. The brain may at this point just be a means to sort of like supplying the body with the hormones and the electrical signals to move it, but the parasite orchestrates the movements. Jumping onto the back with the exposed parasite, slashing it damages the parasite and may remove it from its connection to the spinal cord. As a result, once removed, this results in the death of El Gigante, because as we know, a parasite who's an adult removed from the body of another adult will result in the end of that person, no matter how large they are, which we can see at the end of the game when the leader, Sadler, is taken out. The rest of the parasite have no idea what to do, so they just kind of convulse on the ground. El Gigante is a beast with no real application for Sadler given its decreased intelligence and lack of directability. The parasite appears to share some control with the host, but it's sort of like an 80-20 split. This split has left El Gigante hampered by the parasite, but larger due to the influence of the parasite. But ultimately it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, rocket launcher beats everything.